Hey guys, tonight we drift back, not to a war or a coronation, or even a dramatic betrayal, but to something slower, something smokier. You stand on a dirt path outside a crumbling city, sandal straps digging into your ankles, the scent of burning cedar hanging thick in the air. Behind you, Jerusalem collapses like a tired giant. In front of you, Babylon, foreign, dusty, loud. You're holding someone else's luggage. Your name's been misspelled on a clay tablet, and you're not even sure what day it is anymore. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly soothing to know where people are drifting off all over the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge east, shoulders hunched under the Mesopotamian sun, following a chain of exiles, all wondering what exactly went wrong. Babylon's soldiers weren't subtle. They didn't come bearing gifts. They came with battering rams and a strong distaste for your stone temple. By the time they were done, the first temple lay in glorious ruins, and thousands of Judeans were bundled off like dusty souvenirs to decorate their empire. Exile wasn't new in history, but this one stuck, like molasses on linen. Babylon, for all its might, was a weird place to start over. You couldn't grow the same figs. You couldn't build altars the same way. And that great river Euphrates? It just wasn't the Jordan. But here's the thing. People adjusted, slowly, one foot in front of the other. A makeshift synagogue here, a humble scroll there. Your neighbors talked about local gods with way too many animal heads. You respectfully nodded and then went home to read psalms behind closed doors. And here's a quirky little twist. Some exiles thrived. They became scribes, advisors, astronomers. Others even that eerie footnote that says, Jewish scholars helped shape Babylonian legal texts. Like, you sure you destroyed our temple? But have you considered reorganizing your zoning laws? Revenge in its pettiest, sleepiest form. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, or what was left of it, a few farmers dug through ashes, wondering when the rent was due. And this split those who left and those who remained was the beginning of something quiet but huge, a fracture in what home meant. Some clung to the land, others clung to the idea of the land. Historians still argue whether this exile was truly the start of diaspora thinking, or just a logistical nightmare with long-lasting PR. But either way, you, yes you, have now become a wandering concept. You're less citizen and more cultural cloud. People carry you in memory in psalms, in fasting days with names no one can pronounce on the first try. And it's during one of these long walks beside a canal near Nippur where you finally feel it, the weight of being stateless. You're not a slave exactly, but you don't belong either. You rent. You interpret dreams for the king, then go home to mutter about the Messiah. Your identity is both water and flame, adaptable, luminous, slightly unmanageable. Every few months someone says, we're going back soon. And everyone nods, then goes back to trimming sheep wool or debating obscure verses from Leviticus over flatbread. Hope becomes a slow chant, never shouted, always hummed. And then the sky shifts. Enter Persia. Cyrus the Great shows up with impeccable timing and a surprisingly nice beard. He conquers Babylon like it's Tuesday and announces, you can go home now. Just like that. You blink. Did someone finally read your complaint tablet? But wait, that's next section's drama. Right now you lie on a rooftop in Babylon, counting stars through thick desert haze, wondering if they look the same over Jerusalem. One falls. Or maybe it's just a bat. You roll over on your reed mat and squint into the early Persian sun. Word has been spreading like oil through a market stall. Cyrus, King of Kings, has decreed that exiles may return home. Not just you, but all of you. Judeans, Elamites, whoever got shuffled around in the great imperial realignment. It's like an ancient open mic night for displaced people. You'd think everyone would be packing immediately. But no, some people hesitate. You hesitate. It's been decades. Babylon isn't home, but it has your favorite bakery, your cousin's vineyard, and that shady courtyard where you learn to recite Ezekiel with dramatic flair. Even the pigeons know your face. Still, you do glance toward the west more often now. You touch the stone pendant carved with your family's old name. Maybe it's time. So you join one of the return caravans. It's not glamorous. Picture a very long camping trip with confusing road signs and a suspicious number of donkeys. But eventually the hills of Judea rise into view, scruffy, sun-scorched, and a little underwhelming. The first temple is long gone. Rubble's still hot in some places. And yet you cry, dust and all. But returning isn't a straight line. It's a series of weird administrative headaches. The Persian officials give you building permits with crooked seals. Some neighbors aren't thrilled you're back. Others are just confused. Didn't your grandparents move away? You rebuild walls first, then the altar, then the whole temple itself. Smaller this time, less gold leaf, more practical stone, but still sacred. The Book of Ezra says you weep at the dedication, and not entirely from joy. The new temple looks functional. IKEA if IKEA made holy places. The old men remember Solomon's glittering version, and stare into the fire, silent. And then comes the big split. Some Judeans don't return. They send letters instead. Care packages, prayers. They've built lives in Susa, in Ecbatana, even in far-off Elephantine, where Jewish soldiers guard an Egyptian island. Yes, Egypt, because why not confuse geography a bit more? You write letters too, and slowly, scroll by scroll, the Jewish identity starts to bend, portable, adaptable, less about a land you can touch, more about a rhythm you can live. Weekly Sabbaths, monthly fasts, yearly festivals with clunky tents. These become your nation now. Historians still argue whether Judaism becomes a religion of the book during this period, or whether it had always leaned that way and exile just put it in writing. Either way, you now carry identity not in walls or kings, but in words. You literally cart it around on ox-drawn scrolls. And that's how Babylon doesn't just exile you, it makes you literary. Meanwhile, in Persian court records, your people are a blip, a scribble, a tolerated curiosity. You keep to yourselves. You pay your taxes. You don't cause uprisings yet. You do, however, begin to collect stories. Joseph in Egypt, Daniel in the lion's den, Esther dazzling Ahasuerus with a banquet, and some high-stakes ethnic survival tactics. These are more than bedtime tales, they're emotional survival kits. They whisper, even in exile you can win. Even in a palace full of strangers you can outmaneuver death. And you need those stories, because even as the temple rises again, things don't feel secure. You know, this piece is Persian-shaped. It's only as stable as the next king's whims. So you hedge your bets. Some cousins stay in Babylon. Some settle in Persia proper. A few adventurous souls wander west toward Asia Minor, toward Greece. The return becomes less a moment and more a mood. You return in pieces, with questions, with doubts, with neighbors who squint at your accent. You rebuild your home but keep your exile ways just in case. You keep your sandals by the door. You're leaning against a new stone wall in Jerusalem, sipping something sour made from questionable grapes when the shouting begins. Not angry shouting, just excited. A group of travelers from the west has arrived and they're, well, shiny. Their robes flow like poetry. Their sandals are suspiciously well crafted, and their accents, full-on Hellenic. The Greeks have landed. Technically, it's not the Greeks yet. It's the late stages of Persian rule, and things are still relatively calm. But you hear rumors Alexander, a young Macedonian, with too much ambition and not enough parental supervision, is storming his way across the map like he's playing Risk on Fast Forward. And one day, just like that, Persia folds, like a tent in a desert storm. You're now part of the Greek world, whether you signed up or not. At first, it's sort of fun. The new overlords are obsessed with gymnasiums, poetry, and naming cities after themselves. They build libraries and statues, and introduce olive oil in quantities that feel excessive. You try to be open-minded. You enroll your cousin's kid in a Greek school, even though he comes home quoting Socrates and smelling like chalk. But here's the twist. Greek culture isn't just showing up with wine and tunics. It wants to change you, to polish you, to Hellenize you. That means learning new words for everything. Gods, rituals, even body parts. You attend a symposium and find yourself seated next to a guy named Aristobulus who insists that Plato basically predicted the Torah. You smile politely. You miss Babylon. The gymnasium is especially awkward. It turns out Greek athletics are unclothed. You glance at the Jewish boys hesitating at the threshold, tugging their tunics down, unsure if this is education or just a very confident prank. Circumcision becomes a political flashpoint, literally visible proof that you don't quite fit in. Some boys even undergo dangerous procedures to reverse it. You try not to wince. Historians still argue whether this period was more about cultural blending or forced assimilation. Either way, You spend a lot of time saying things like, "Sure, I can honor Zeus and also keep Sabbath, probably, maybe. Let me check with my rabbi." Meanwhile, the temple, your sacred, humble second temple, is slowly becoming a battleground of identity. Some priests start embracing Greek customs. Others resist. Tension brews like old lentils left too long in the sun, and then things escalate. One of the Greek-leaning kings, Antiochus IV, with the self-appointed nickname Epiphanes, meaning God manifest, which should have been a red flag, decides Judaism is a bit too weird for his taste. He bans key practices, circumcision, Sabbath, dietary laws. And then, cherry on top, he puts a statue of Zeus right in the temple. You are not chill about this. A priest named Mattathias throws a table. His son Judah takes up a sword. Cue the Maccabees, a guerrilla family. Drama that turns into a full-blown rebellion. It's dusty, violent, and heroic. You fight in sandals. You hide scrolls in caves. You whisper prayers between ambushes. Eventually, against all logic, you win. The temple is reclaimed, cleansed, rededicated. You light a lamp, with barely a drop of oil. It burns for 8 days. You eat fried foods in celebration and promise to never let your identity slip again. You exhale. But the scars remain. Greek culture doesn't leave, it just stops being so pushy. You've learned something unsettling. Even when you have your land, your temple, your rituals, your place in the world can still feel fragile. One king, one edict, one statue, and everything can tilt. So you write more, teach more. You build your identity like a scroll, layer by layer, looped tight, but ready to unroll when the winds shift. And they will shift again. You're walking down a dusty road toward the temple again, but something feels off. There are more soldiers than usual. And they're not Greek. Their armor's heavier. Their sandals somehow louder. You hear Latin instead of Greek in the banners? Definitely Roman. Congratulations. You're now part of the Roman Empire, whether you like it or not. At first, it's not all bad. Romans love order and your people love rules. Seems like a match, right? They build aqueducts, pave roads, and generally act like the empire is a glorified HOA with military backup. But you can already sense the tension simmering, like olive oil just shy of burning. The Romans install local puppet kings. Herod the Great is the first and the flashiest. Paranoid, ambitious, and very into architecture. He renovates the Second Temple, like he's auditioning for ancient world's next top mega project. Marble, gold, grand staircases. It's beautiful, unsettlingly so. You stand at the entrance and wonder if it's still your temple or just Herod's trophy. And here comes the quirky bit. Herod wasn't fully Jewish by birth, and definitely not beloved. But he kept things relatively calm by building both temples and fortresses. Because nothing says trust me like a death palace on every hilltop. Still, things unravel fast. Taxes climb. Roman governors rotate through like bad substitute teachers, each worse than the last. You protest, they shrug. You protest harder, they crucify someone, sometimes dozens. Crucifixion becomes the background noise of public spaces. It's just there. The creaking wood. The silence around it. And then a man named Jesus starts wandering around Galilee, talking about love, redemption, and a kingdom not of this world. You're curious. The Pharisees are annoyed. The Romans are confused. Eventually, he's executed like any other rebel, but something about him lingers. His followers multiply. A splinter forms. You don't know it yet, but this is the beginning of Christianity. Historians still argue whether Jesus intended to start a new religion, or just reform an old one. What you do know is that his message and the movement around him will reshape the world and complicate your identity even more. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, the pressure builds. Rome takes and takes. You revolt not once, not twice, but 3 times across a few generations. The first rebellion is the most dramatic. The Romans respond with overwhelming force, laying siege to Jerusalem in 70 CE. You're trapped behind the walls, rationing barley and reading Lamentations by candlelight. And then, the unthinkable. The Second Temple burns. You see it. You smell it. Stone collapsing into ash. Sacred scrolls curling in fire. You want to scream, but the noise of falling history drowns you out. This isn't just a building, it's your cosmic anchor. You're linked to the divine, and it's gone. In the aftermath, Rome bans Jews from entering Jerusalem, literally. Your capital is renamed Aelia Capitolina. Statues of Jupiter now stand where your priests once lit incense. The city becomes a ghost of itself. You scatter, again. This time it feels deeper. Like something fundamental has snapped. You're no longer people without a king. You're people without a center. The temple, both literal and symbolic, is erased. But you adapt again. You mourn, you fast. You write. The sages gather in a small town called Yavne and say, let's build a new Judaism. One without a temple. They start interpreting, debating, defining. The Mishnah begins. Pages, not pillars. Law, not land. You sit cross-legged on woven mats, listening to rabbis argue over how to bless bread and when to say, Shema, it's domestic. Humble and powerful. You're not just surviving, you're inventing something portable again. You leave Jerusalem behind, but never truly. You carry its dust in your shoes, its songs in your throat, and somewhere deep inside the ember of return still glows. You don't talk about revolt anymore. You talk about resilience. You don't build altars, you build memory. Because you've learned something sobering. Empires fall, but exile lingers. You're standing at the edge of the Mediterranean now, your sandals caked in unfamiliar mud. A boat rocks gently beside you, its hull scuffed from too many hasty departures. You glance over your shoulder. Jerusalem, Judea, even Aelia Capitolina, all just a smear on the horizon. You don't say goodbye. What's the point? You've done this before. You set sail. The diaspora begins not as a single event, but 1,000 quiet exits. One family heads for Alexandria, another for Rome. Some go north into Anatolia, others east into Parthia. You scatter like almond blossoms in a gust, fragrant, temporary, disorganized. And this is where it gets weird. Instead of unraveling, your people grow more cohesive. Somehow being separated everywhere makes you feel more unified. Like distance sharpens the signal. You write to each other. You send messengers, scholars, spices, marriage contracts. You remain tethered by Torah, tradition, and the creeping sense that everyone else finds you peculiar. In Alexandria, you sit beneath palm trees and debate the law in Greek. You translate the Hebrew Bible into what becomes known as the Septuagint, a version that future Christians will quote, sometimes to your chagrin. In Rome, you worship quietly in homes, behind shuttered windows, listening for soldiers' boots between psalms. It's not persecution yet, but it's not comfort either. You're tolerated, mostly, until someone decides to blame you for a flood, a famine, or a philosophy they don't like. Then the whispers begin. Still you adapt. Again. You become tailors, merchants, doctors. You build communities around synagogues, where every service ends with the same yearning. Next year in Jerusalem. Though you know, deep down, that year may never come. Historians still argue whether this was resignation or coded defiance. Were you truly mourning or preserving the dream like a precious heirloom, passed from tongue to tongue? You don't know. You just know that saying it feels like breathing. And here's the quirky bit. You start showing up in the strangest places. In the Carpathian forests, a lone rabbi builds a sukkah from birch. In the marketplaces of Spain, a Jewish poet recites psalms while selling silks. In the spice bazaars of Yemen, a cantor sings in Hebrew so ancient, it sounds like gravel and honey. You are everywhere and nowhere. A people on pause, a passport of memory. Even the Roman Empire starts to groan. You watch it wobble from afar, smug in your longevity. When Rome splits, then crumbles, you barely flinch. Empires fall. You've seen it before. You're the historical version of background radiation. Always there, unshakable, inconvenient to those who hoped you'd vanish. And yet something's changed. You don't dream of rebuilding the temple quite as loudly. You bury your hope under layers of ritual and commentary. Shabbat candles flicker in foreign kitchens. Hebrew becomes a language for prayer, not streets. You're drifting, but still afloat. One night in a narrow alley in Antioch, a child asks you, "Why don't we live in the land anymore?" You pause, then answer, "Because we're still writing the story." You don't tell him how long the story might be. You're sitting at a table in a dimly lit home somewhere in Galilee, a waxy candle flickering beside you. Outside, the chickens have long since stopped squawking, and the neighbors have gone quiet, either asleep or studying the same way you are, bent over parchment and questions. Tonight's debate is about what blessing to say over lentils. Tomorrow it might be about lost oxen. This is the rabbinic era. You're not in Jerusalem anymore. You haven't been for generations. But somehow, through sheer stubbornness and an unnatural love of footnotes, your people have turned exile into curriculum. The rabbis begin to gather, not in great marble halls or massive temples, but in modest rooms, farmhouses, courtyards shaded with fig leaves. There's no central government, no army, no land. But what you do have is halakha, Jewish law, and scholars. So many scholars. Some beardy, some moody, all passionate. They talk in layers. Rabbi A said this, but Rabbi B disagreed. And Rabbi C added a weird metaphor about goats. This becomes the Talmud, a swirling, massive conversation stitched across centuries. It's like the world's longest group chat, with everyone respectfully interrupting each other. You read the arguments aloud, tracing letters with your finger. No one ever really wins. That's not the point. And here's the quirk. Without a temple, your identity now lives in arguments, in repetition, in the comfort of structure. You mark time with rituals, wrap your days in mitzvot, and train your memory like a muscle. You keep kosher not because the neighbors care. They don't, but because it roots you. It says, I'm still me even here. Historians still argue whether this was a religious innovation or an emotional coping mechanism. Did exile make your culture more rigorous? Or did rigor become your culture to survive exile? Either way, the result is the same. You're still here. Meanwhile, the outside world spins on. Christianity grows, evolves, splinters. The Roman Empire turns into the Byzantine Empire. New rulers emerge. But you remain complicated, distrusted, misunderstood. People wonder why you don't convert, why you don't assimilate, why your holidays are always on different dates and involve so many carbs. You keep a low profile mostly, but sometimes rabbis rise to prominence in local courts. Jewish physicians treat caliphs. Jewish astronomers advise kings, and then go home to chant ancient blessings over soup. Your people start drifting eastward too, into Persia, where things are oddly hospitable. In the academies of Sura and Pumbedita, scholars argue with even more enthusiasm. The Babylonian Talmud is born here, longer, messier, more detailed than its Jerusalem counterpart. It becomes the heartbeat of Jewish learning, echoing across generations like a very old joke that never stops being relevant. At your Shabbat table you tell stories about Elijah, who might be hiding under the table, about Rabbi Akiva, who saw holiness even in Roman torture, about the Messiah who will come someday, probably when everyone stops asking. You don't speak Hebrew on the street anymore, not really, but you sing it, in blessings, in lullabies, in whispered prayers before sleep. It's not a living language, it's a glowing ember, and maybe that's enough, because even without a land, you've built a nation, one stitched from ink, law, and longing. You still don't know when the story ends, but you do know how to turn the page. You wake to the faint clatter of hooves and a rooster that sounds deeply offended by existence. It's morning in medieval Europe, and your house is made of wood, stone, and quiet resilience. You're in the Rhineland, maybe Spire or Worms. The year? Who knows? Time moves differently when you're surviving between pogroms. You stretch, murmur the Modéani, and glance at the mezuzah on your doorframe. Still there. Still holy. Outside, the church bells ring. Your Christian neighbors cross themselves, their children giving you sideways glances, not cruel, just unsure. The lines have already been drawn. You're Jewish. That means different food, different clothes, different calendar, and for many a different suspicion. You open your prayer book and run your fingers over the worn pages. Today's a market day. You'll sell textiles or weigh grain or work as a moneylender. One of the few professions allowed. Not because you chose it, but because guilds don't let you in. And fields aren't offered to foreigners, even ones born here. Still, life has rhythm. You marry under a chuppah in the courtyard. Drink wine with your neighbors, sing on Friday nights. There's laughter, even poetry. Jewish poets flourish in places like Provence and Cordoba, writing verses about love and exile and whether God is tired of hearing from you. But danger never sleeps. You hear it in whispers first. Rumors about wells being poisoned, about strange rituals in dark corners. Then come the mobs. The crusaders marching east toward Jerusalem stop off to massacre you on the way. Just a warm-up, really. They tear through Jewish quarters like pages from a book, and suddenly your synagogue becomes a hiding place, or a grave. You survive, sometimes, sometimes not. You move again, east this time. Poland, Lithuania. The lords there want tax revenue and educated advisors. You arrive with your books, your scrolls, your fear, and for a while things are better. You build shtetls, tight-knit Jewish villages with cobbled streets, clucking chickens, and eternal arguments about whether your neighbor is overcooking the coolant. You raise children on folktales and the sound of Yiddish lullabies. Every doorway leads to another opinion. Every rabbi is someone's cousin. And here's the quirky thing. In the middle of all this persecution, you invent joy. Not shallow joy, deep, soulful, stubborn joy. Joy that sings in minor keys and tells jokes in tragic tones. You develop Purim Spiel's comedic plays about ancient survival. You drink just enough to blur the line between blessed be Mordecai and cursed be Haman. Because if you're going to be hunted, you might as well laugh first. Historians still argue whether this joy was cultural defiance or divine submission. Was laughter a rebellion or a prayer? You just know it helped you sleep. Meanwhile, in the rabbinic academies, questions keep multiplying. Is a chicken born without a beak still kosher? Can you light a candle with borrowed fire on Hanukkah? Why does the Messiah take so long? You never get final answers, but you treasure the asking. And in the middle of it all, the poetry blooms. You whisper verses by Yehuda Halevi. My heart is in the east, and I'm at the edge of the west. You cry into psalms tucked into the folds of your prayer shawl, and you dream still somehow. You've lost your land, your temple, your status, but never your voice. It echoes down cobbled streets and across the cold wooden floors of midnight study halls, lit by oil lamps and aching hope. Because the exile continues, but so does the story. You blink against the sun filtering through the latticework of a stone courtyard. The air smells like cardamom and dates. Somewhere nearby, a camel makes a noise that sounds like a curse in Aramaic. Welcome to the golden age of Jewish life under Muslim rule. You're not in Christian Europe anymore, you're in Baghdad. And not just any Baghdad. This is the Baghdad capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, the heartbeat of intellectual life in the known world. You live down the road from libraries that house more scrolls than some entire kingdoms. The House of Wisdom is buzzing with translators, astronomers, philosophers. There are debates about math, metaphysics, and whether the stars can predict your dinner. You step into a synagogue nestled between mosques and spice vendors. There's no fear on your face. The caliph tolerates your presence. More than that, he occasionally uses your wisdom. Jewish physicians tend to royal fevers. Jewish translators preserve Greek texts. Jewish astronomers help chart the skies for prayer times. You're part of the ecosystem, if not the top of it. Your community thrives. You speak Judeo-Arabic, Arabic written in Hebrew letters, because apparently even your dialects insist on being hybrids. You study Torah with one hand and Aristotle with the other. The Talmud lives on your shelf, but so does Avicenna. And here's the quirky bit. You have a gain. Not a vibe, an actual title. The Geonim are the heads of rabbinic academies in Sura and Pumbedita, and they issue responsa to Jews all over the world. Got a weird question about tithing barley in Morocco? Write a letter. A scholar in Babylon will answer eventually with footnotes. It's slow. It's dusty. It's brilliant. Historians still argue whether this was Jewish life at its peak, or simply a bright spot between storms. Was coexistence genuine or just convenient? You don't ask. You're too busy listening to your son recite Maimonides 13, Principles of Faith while feeding a goat. Yes, Maimonides. He's alive now, or maybe recently dead. Either way, his presence lingers. Philosopher, physician, halakhic juggernaut. He writes in precise Arabic, then gets translated back into Hebrew centuries later. His guide for the perplexed is confusing, compelling, and just ambiguous enough to cause arguments across 5 continents. Meanwhile, in Al-Andalus Muslim Spain, you hear music. Literal music. Jews write poetry in Arabic meter. They compose odes to Jerusalem, flirtations in coded biblical allusions, even treatises on grammar that sound suspiciously like love letters. You walk through Cordoba at dusk. The air smells like orange blossoms. Jewish courtiers sip tea with Muslim viziers and debate whether infinity has weight. It's surreal. It's gorgeous. And it won't last. Christian armies inch downward. The Reconquista is a slow, relentless march. You hear rumors of burned books, forced sermons, neighbors being converted with suspicious speed. You keep your head down for now. But in this moment, right now, your world is luminous. You light Shabbat candles in tiled courtyards. You discuss astronomy by moonlight. You name your children after prophets and poets alike. You don't just survive, you flourish. It's a chapter no one talks about enough, and even as the call to prayer echoes through the city, mingling with the hum of Talmudic verses and the click of backgammon tiles, you close your eyes and whisper, "Next year in Jerusalem," because the exile softens but never fades. You stand beneath a lemon tree in the courtyard of your family's home in Seville. The year is 1491, and the sun casts lazy golden stripes across the cobblestones. A cat yawns somewhere. Everything looks peaceful. But you already feel it in the air change. Heavier than summer. Sharper than the knife your father uses to prepare the Sabbath fish. You're in Spain, during its final days of Jewish grandeur. For centuries, this has been a Jewish paradise mostly. Under both Muslim and Christian rule, Jews served as advisors. Doctors, poets, merchants. You walk past libraries that contain Hebrew sonnets alongside Arabic. Treatises on algebra. You wear robes dyed in warm saffron. You teach your children both Torah and astronomy. Your community thrives in ways your ancestors in Babylon could only imagine. You even have a name for this era. La convivencia, the coexistence. Jews, Christians, and Muslims living together. Not perfectly, not equally, but for a while something like harmony existed. You lit candles on Friday night, and no one knocked on the door asking questions. Yet. But things are changing. You hear it first as murmurs from the cathedral steps, then in official proclamations. The Inquisition has arrived, cloaked in crimson and carrying too many torches. It's led by people who think forced conversions are spiritual favors and who believe inquisitive conversations are best handled with fire. You shift. You adapt. You've done it before. Some Jews convert outwardly and continue practicing in secret. They become conversos, a term with edges. You celebrate Yom Kippur behind drawn curtains, whispering Avinu Malkeinu, while pretending it's a Latin hymn. It's a dangerous dance, and then in 1492 the floor disappears beneath you. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand issue the Alhambra Decree. You read it once, then again. Its meaning doesn't change, leave or convert. You have 3 months. You pack what you can, scrolls, candlesticks, recipes whispered from grandmother to daughter. You bury silver in the garden you'll never see again. You hug neighbors who became enemies and enemies who suddenly seem sympathetic. You hold your children tightly, promising them things you can't guarantee. Historians still argue whether the expulsion was fueled more by economics or religious zeal. Did the monarchs believe it would purify their kingdom? Or were Jewish bankers just too convenient to eliminate? You never get the chance to ask. And here's the quirky pain. You gave Spain your poets, your translators, your mapmakers, possibly even the guy who told Columbus how to get to the Americas. And in return you get a deadline, so you leave. Some go east toward the Ottoman Empire, where Sultan Bayezid allegedly mocks Spain's cleverness in expelling such useful citizens. Others head to North Africa, Italy, or back toward familiar Turkish streets. The Sephardic diaspora is born, not just exiles, but exiles again. You set up shop in Thessaloniki, in Izmir, in Cairo. Your Spanish lives shrink to accent and kitchen. Ladino, your Judeo-Spanish dialect becomes a lullaby of loss and lemon zest. You light Sabbath candles in exile again. But this time, something deeper fractures. Spain was more than land. It was song. It was poetry. It was home in full color. And now you carry that color in memory. You sing it in minor keys. Because exile isn't always violent. Sometimes it just erases. You sit on a wooden bench in the corner of a tiny study hall in a Polish shtetl, somewhere between Krakow and somewhere else. Snow presses softly against the windows. A kettle simmers on a rusty iron stove. In the other room, a chicken is making a series of existentially concerned clucks. It's the 17th century, and you are profoundly cold. But inside, it's warm with arguments. You're surrounded by rabbis, some young, some old, all with opinions. The table is cluttered with open books, commentaries on top of commentaries. You're currently in the middle of a spirited discussion about the ritual purity of butter. Churned by a goy if the cow was fed by a Jew. Riveting stuff. This is Ashkenazic Jewish life in its full snowy bloom. You live in a shtetl, a small, tight-knit village with winding alleys, sagging wooden roofs, and more scholars than you'd think could comfortably fit. The synagogue doubles as school, town hall, and emergency shelter from angry mobs, which you'll probably need again. Still, the rhythm of life continues. You daven at dawn, debate at noon, and drift to bed murmuring verses of the Shema. Your kids play, dreidel, and occasionally quote Maimonides at each other in Yiddish. You suspect one of them might be the next great rabbi or possibly just very loud. Economically, you live in a strange corner of society. You're not peasants, not nobles. You're other. Sometimes merchants, sometimes tax collectors, often scapegoats. During calmer periods, your communities flourish. You create cheddarim for children, yeshivat for the truly sleepless, and even some lively matchmaking networks that involve more spreadsheets than romance. And then come the taxes. In Poland and elsewhere in Eastern Europe, local nobles love using Jews as middlemen. Need to collect grain, regulate vodka, or manage toll bridges. Hire a Jew. Need someone to blame when peasants riot? Also the Jew. It's a very convenient, terribly consistent cycle. Here's the quirky part. You even get taxed on candles, on chickens, on books. There are literal debates about whether a roasted duck counts as luxury taxation if you eat it while frowning. Jewish life is bureaucratically fascinating and deeply overregulated. Still, the learning never stops. In Lublin and Vilna, rabbinic academies buzz. You write response to those endless Q&As about obscure halakhic dilemmas. A chicken laid an egg on Yom Tov? There's a responsum for that. Someone sneezed during the Amida? Also covered. Nothing escapes commentary. Historians still argue whether these small communities were flourishing or merely surviving in complexity. Were the shtetls vibrant or trapped? You'd say, both. You laughed more than anyone expected. But also, you didn't unpack your bag completely. The threat of violence is always near. In the 1640s, the Cossack uprisings roll across the region like a sick wind. The Khmelnytsky massacres, in particular, leave whole communities in ruin. Synagogues burned, scrolls shredded, families erased from census and memory. You walk through smoke and mud, and again, you whisper, "Why are we still in exile?" But you don't stop. You collect the fragments, literally. Pages of Talmud, torn and smudged, are rescued and studied. You begin again in another shtetl, with one menorah and a stubborn belief in continuity. A wedding is held in a barn, a bris beneath a crumbling roof. Life persists, not in spite of the suffering, but alongside it. You learn to bake joy into your rituals, to find magic in the mundane. A Hasidic Rebbe teaches that every breath can be holy, that even sweeping the floor can be a prayer, if you do it with intention. And there, with your hands in warm challah dough, you believe it. Because exile doesn't mean silence. It just means singing in the key of snow. You're walking behind a man with wild hair, a tunic slightly too long, and eyes that look like they haven't blinked since yesterday's sunrise. He's talking loudly about visions, angels, and the imminent end of exile. People gather around him in a field, nodding, gasping, occasionally fainting. You wonder if this is the real thing, or just another Thursday. Welcome to the age of messianic fever. You've been in exile for over 1,000 years. The temple's still gone, Jerusalem's still under someone else's rule, and your neighbors still think you killed their deity, even though it's been 15 centuries and you've explained this 100 times. So when someone appears claiming to be the Messiah, or knows someone who is, you listen. Sometimes skeptically, sometimes desperately. The earliest waves of messianic hope go back centuries, of course. Bar Kokhba in the 2nd century CE gave it a noble try, though his revolution ended in disaster and Roman scorched earth policy. But now the hopes keep coming, and so do the hopefuls. In the 12th century, you read breathless letters about a distant Jewish king, Prester John, supposedly ruling a massive empire somewhere beyond the Islamic world. He'll ride in with elephants, scholars, and a divinely blessed army. Spoiler, he never shows up. But the letters, incredible bedtime reading. And then there's the 17th century, oh boy. Enter Sabbatai Zevi, a mystic from Smyrna. Charismatic, intense, oddly magnetic.
He declares himself the Messiah.
People swoon. Fast, some sell their homes. Others carve Sabbatai as king into synagogue walls. You know he's serious because rabbis start fainting mid-blessing. It's like Beatlemania, but with fasting and more Hebrew numerology. The movement spreads like wildfire. Italy, Poland, Yemen, even Dutch newspapers catch wind of it. You sit at your table reading one of his proclamations, and for the first time in years your hands tremble. Could it be? You pack a small bag, just in case. And then, it happens. He's arrested by the Ottoman Sultan, given a choice: convert to Islam or die. He converts. The air leaves the room. Some followers break down. Others spin creative theologies to rationalize it. Maybe this was part of the plan. Maybe salvation must first descend into darkness. Others quietly bury their Sabbatai tokens in backyards and never speak of it again. Historians still argue whether Sabbatai was sincere, mentally ill, or a master manipulator. You just feel hollow and vaguely annoyed about the goat you gave away in celebration, but the pattern continues. You keep dreaming. Another mystic arises, then another. They never quite lead to Jerusalem, but each leaves a footprint. Story, a taste of possibility. In the corners of your home you keep little signs. A dusty bag always half-packed. A tattered map under the pillow. A lullaby that ends with "when the Redeemer comes." And here's the quirky bit. Your belief in the Messiah becomes less about when, and more about how you live. You say, if he comes, good. If not, I still light candles. The Messiah becomes a metaphor, and also still may be real. You live in the overlap, where allegory and longing sip tea together, because hope for you is both habit and inheritance. It doesn't matter how many false alarms ring through history, you still open the door each Passover for Elijah, just in case. You sit in a Viennese cafe stirring sugar into your coffee with a tiny silver spoon. The world has changed. The spoon is shiny. Your coat has lapels. There's a newspaper on your table, freshly printed, and you can read every word. Because now you're allowed to. You're a Jew in 19th century Europe. And for the first time in, well, ever, people are starting to say the word emancipation like it means something. You can vote in some places, hold office in others. Some universities even let you attend without asking which prophet your grandfather followed. It feels new, exciting, and just a little suspicious. You glance out the cafe window. Cobblestone streets shimmer in the morning rain. A streetcar clatters by. On the corner, a man in a top hat is arguing about Kant. You sip your coffee and pretend to be bored, but your heart is pounding. Because this is the Enlightenment, and Jews are being invited sort of into the club. Some embrace it fully. You wear European clothes, trim your beard, start writing in German or French instead of Hebrew or Yiddish. Some change their names. Isaac becomes Isidore. Rivka becomes Renee. You attend salons, discuss Spinoza, read Shakespeare, and wonder if maybe this is it. Maybe the exile is ending. Not through a return to land, but through acceptance. But here's the rub. The more you fit in, the more you realize you still don't. At least not everywhere. In Germany and France, you're emancipated on paper, but anti-Jewish cartoons still plaster newspapers. In Russia, emancipation is more like a suggestion, one that frequently gets revoked. Pogroms sweep across shtetls like plagues in uniform. You see your neighbors' houses torched. You see families dragged away. You see the familiar cycle again. You write letters. You speak at protests. You publish essays on Jewish identity and the universal brotherhood of man. Some of you double down on integration. We'll prove ourselves indispensable. Others start whispering new words. Aliyah, return, Zionism. But that's later. Right now, you're caught in a strange in-between. You're allowed to attend university, but your professor still stares too long at your surname. You can own land, but the neighbors ask if you're banking on the side. You walk down streets paved with modernity, but with ancient fears curled in your coat pocket like a warning. Here's the quirky bit. Jewish newspapers become wildly popular. Dozens of them. In every language. Some secular, some religious. Some just confused. You read them all. You argue with the articles out loud over your eggs. You write passionate letters to the editor, sign them anonymously, and feel better. Historians still argue whether emancipation was genuine progress or a clever trap. Did Europe truly open its arms or just widen the cage? You're not sure. You're too busy trying to decide if your daughter should study piano or Talmud, or both. Your synagogue has an organ now. Some services resemble operas. The rabbi wears a robe that looks suspiciously like a Lutheran pastor's. It's comforting and slightly eerie. You miss the old tunes, but you love the books. Oh, the books! Moses Mendelssohn writes about reason and faith. Heinrich Heine turns Hebrew lament into German lyricism. You read, debate, sigh dramatically. You live in a moment where Jewish identity stretches like taffy. Traditional, modern, Orthodox, Reform, Enlightened, assimilated, Bundist, Yeshivish, Zionist. You wear a hat that says we belong, and secretly keep a satchel packed for the day you don't. Because even in the coffee-scented promise of modernity, you hear it again. A whisper, a rumor, a footstep too loud at midnight. You kiss your children goodnight. and pray again that this time will be different. You're standing at the edge of a modest dining room in Basel, Switzerland. The year is 1897. The carpet is over-patterned. The air smells faintly of old cigars, and the mood is somewhere between a formal dinner party and a quiet existential crisis. Welcome to the First Zionist Congress. You're not here for the wine. You glance around the room. Jewish delegates from across Europe are nervously shaking hands and adjusting their waistcoats. Some wear yarmulkes, others sport bow ties and pince-nez. A few arrived from Russia, still smelling of train soot and revolution. One fellow is muttering in French, another in Yiddish, a third in Ladino. Communication is chaotic, but somehow everyone understands what's at stake. Then Theodor Herzl stands up, bearded, poised, dramatic. He looks like a man who either just wrote an opera or founded a movement, and in a way he's doing both. He speaks of a Jewish state, a real one. Not a metaphor, not a prayer. A place on a map with borders and trees and taxes. You lean forward, breath catching just slightly. Could this be the answer to 2,000 years of wandering? Herzl's argument is elegant. Emancipation has failed. Jews are still seen as outsiders, even in places where they've lived for centuries. The pogroms in Russia, the Dreyfus Affair in France. Even in Vienna, where he lives, anti-Semitism simmers beneath every social contract. It's time, he says, for Jews to stop waiting for acceptance. It's time to build a homeland. You sip water, heart racing. Not everyone claps. Some rabbis are horrified. Only the Messiah can bring us back to the land, they whisper. Others scoff Jews farming? That's adorable. Some propose Argentina. Others demand Palestine. A few mutter about Uganda. Yes, Uganda. Things get tense. Someone nearly spills herring on a draft constitution. This is the quirky bit. Zionism, for all its unity-themed rhetoric, is immediately fractious. There are labor Zionists, religious Zionists, revisionist, cultural Zionists, anti-Zionist Zionists. Everyone wants a homeland, just not the same one in the same way, or at the same temperature. Still, a seed is planted. You walk home from the Congress that night beneath a quiet sky. The stars feel just a little different. The idea is in your bones now. You imagine a world where Hebrew is spoken on street corners, where Jewish children climb olive trees instead of hiding under cellar doors, where no one asks you what you believe before deciding whether to trust your handshake. Historians still argue whether Herzl was a visionary or a desperate reactionary, whether Zionism saved Judaism or splintered it forever. You don't care tonight. You just know something shifted. You start writing letters, reading pamphlets, dreaming differently. The next years are filled with meetings, fundraisers, arguments over land purchases and immigration quotas. You donate to the Jewish National Fund, even if all you can spare is a coin. You keep a photograph of Herzl in your study, right next to the mezuzah and an empty jar labeled olive seeds. In the cafes of Warsaw, the shtetls of Galicia, the alleys of Casablanca, people talk about Eretz Yisrael, not just as a dream but a possibility. You begin to imagine your feet on its soil. You start to wonder if the exile might someday end, but you know better than to say it too loud, not yet. You hold a map in your hands. It's creased, brittle, and confusingly vague around the Middle East. Lines are drawn in pencil, then erased. Others are redrawn in ink. Some names are circled, some are crossed out entirely, and somewhere, hovering in a narrow strip along the Mediterranean, is a label Palestine. It's 1917 and the world is unraveling. You live in a time of empires collapsing like poorly built sukkahs. The Ottoman Empire, once the reluctant host of your diaspora, is crumbling. In its place, the British arrive with crisp uniforms, dubious promises, and a growing list of territorial obligations. They call it the British Mandate. You call it another chapter in the saga. Then comes the Balfour Declaration. You read it once. Then again. A single paragraph, just 67 words long, but your fingers tremble. The British government says it supports the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. You almost drop your tea. A national home. The phrase is maddeningly ambiguous. Is it a state, a colony, a glorified suburb? No one agrees. Not even the British. Still, it's the first time in centuries that a major power says, on paper, that Jews should return somewhere. You look up from the letter and realize something. Not everyone is thrilled. The Arab communities already living in Palestine are nervous, then angry, then organized. You can see it in their eyes. You wouldn't want strangers showing up with foreign accents and saying, "Hey, our ancestors lived here 2,000 years ago. Mind if we rebuild?" The situation spirals slowly, then quickly. Jewish immigration increases. Kibbutzim spring up across the hills, collective farms humming with Hebrew songs and awkward first harvests. You plant citrus trees and build schools from stone and dreams. But violence brews. There are riots, massacres, retaliations. British officials fumble, sigh and write more memos. You try to pray in peace while watching barbed wire creep across the horizon. Historians still argue whether the Balfour Declaration was a gift, a trap, or just imperial theater. Was it genuine support or strategic tokenism to win wartime allies? You don't know. You just know your cousin was beaten in Jaffa, and your best friend left Krakow for Tel Aviv and hasn't written since. Here's the quirky bit. British officials begin issuing contradictory documents to Jews and Arabs, promising one thing here, another thing there. It's diplomacy by copy-paste. Meanwhile, you read Der Judenstaat again. Herzl's words feel urgent now, not dreamy. You wonder if he could have predicted this chaos, or the dusty train tracks, or the families camped beneath olive trees because their homes were burned again. You begin hearing new words. Aliyah, Haganah, white paper. You begin to understand that Jewish return is no longer poetic. It's political, bureaucratic, violent, and yet you stay. You watch as Tel Aviv rises from sand dunes, as Hebrew becomes the language of street signs and lullabies again, as children run through orange groves shouting Abba, Ima instead of Papa, Mama, or Tada Mama. It's surreal, but you still haven't returned, not fully. You're not a sovereign. You don't control borders. You don't feel safe. You still write letters to family in Odessa, in Fez, in Brooklyn, and every letter ends with the same line. Maybe soon. Maybe we'll all be there soon. You wake to a radio crackling in the corner of your one-room apartment in Jerusalem. The walls are cracked. The coffee is bitter. But the voice coming through the speaker makes your hands tremble. The State of Israel is established. You sit very still. It's May 14th, 1948. David. Ben-Gurion's voice is low, clear, tired. You stare at the radio as if it might open into a new world. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's weeping. Somewhere else, fireworks you're not sure are celebratory, or shellfire pop in the sky. You are home. And also not. In the following hours, 5 Arab armies declare war. The ink on the Declaration of Independence hasn't even dried. You draft your sons. You patch uniforms. You pray fast. You bury friends. The War of Independence is dirty, complicated, and far from victorious in feeling. Neighborhoods split. Villages vanish. Maps twist. Still, you fight. And somehow, miraculously, the state survives. You walk the streets of Tel Aviv and watch a nation building itself in real time. Construction dust coats your shoes. Bureaucracies spring up like weeds, ministry of this, department of that. Hebrew is no longer a prayer language. It's how your teenager asks for bus money. And here's the unsettling part, you're a citizen now. Not an exile, not a tolerated other, but a citizen. It's strange. You carry the blue ID card, but your reflexes haven't caught up. You still flinch when a uniform passes. You still keep your papers in the same folder your grandfather used in Galicia, just in case. And you still write letters. To your cousin in Argentina, to your old cheddar teacher in Brooklyn. You tell them what it's like to have a passport that says Jewish state. You tell them about growing tomatoes in the Negev and singing Hatikva in the kitchen with the window open. But it's not simple. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians flee or are expelled. Some go to Lebanon, others to Gaza. Some remain stateless for generations. You see them from across fences and sometimes from across the street. You understand exile better than most, and now you're part of someone else's story of loss. Historians still argue whether 1948 was liberation or displacement or both. Was it justice deferred or justice displaced? You sit with that. You don't flinch from it. Not anymore. Because being home doesn't mean being comfortable. You join the Army Reserves. You argue at bus stops about policy. You start each holiday with a toast and end it with a siren test. You plant trees, then later learn they were planted over destroyed villages. You speak Hebrew in public but whisper Yiddish when no one is listening. And yet, you see your children walking to school with books in hand, not passports. You hear Hebrew lullabies on the radio. You light Shabbat candles on a balcony overlooking Haifa, where synagogues and mosques breathe the same salty air. This is not the end of exile, but it's different now. Your return isn't clean. It isn't complete, but it's real. You are on the land, not as visitor, not as ghost, but as presence. And so you keep walking, with complexity, with contradiction, with hope, because that's what return always was, not a straight line, a spiral. And now as you lie back and let your mind drift, the journey slows, the voices fade, the maps blur into soft smudges and the borders become lines made of fog and memory. You have walked across deserts and oceans, through courtrooms and kitchens, synagogues and study halls. You have worn the dust of Jerusalem and the snow of Vilna. You have spoken prayers, in languages long faded, under skies that have never forgotten you. You have waited. You have wandered. You have woven exile into lullabies, lit hope on candle wicks, and whispered return even when your feet stayed still. And now you rest. The story isn't over. The debates continue. The questions still unfold. But for tonight you let them go. Let the words soften. Let the arguments settle into silence. Let the noise of history become a gentle hum. You are not a name in a footnote. You are the echo in the text, the pause between verses, the breath before the next sentence begins. Close your eyes. The land will still be there in the morning. So will the memory. And so will you. Sweet dreams.